Jen, Eddie, and Lior. Today, we're talking about Scrum Master Stockholm Syndrome. And I can only kind of guess about what it is that we're going to talk about today because I'm going to hand it over to the experts in just a bit. But I think what we'll be covering is why do we love bad practice? How do we help a team that seems to really enjoy shooting themselves in the foot? How do we teach people to be something when they've been one thing this whole time? Say, how do we get a PO to be a Scrum Master when they're so stuck in ways of however they were doing things before? I think that's what we're talking about. So I'm just going to hand it over to the group. What is the Scrum Master Stockholm Syndrome? How do we spot it? And what do we do about it?
Stockholm Syndrome, a term maybe not all of you are familiar with, and it's obviously something much more extreme than when we're talking about now. Not to try and compare something so serious to something maybe not as serious. Essentially, Stockholm Syndrome is a term where captors or people who are captive by something, held kind of prisoner or abused, kind of start siding with their captor. So you see people who get, kidnapped or something, eventually becoming best friends with the person who's kidnapping them. We're not talking about anything as dark as that. What we're talking about here is when the team is the captive and the captor is bad practice. So sometimes you get so stuck into bad practice because of poor management, just because of habit, because of fears. I mean, we'll probably get a little bit deeper into why we think teams get into this. But the idea is essentially you're doing something that's bad. It's not helpful for you. It's not really working, but you kind of convince yourself, oh no, everything's fine the way we're doing it as well. And the way I see it mostly is if a scrum master comes in and sets in very dominantly, this is how we do things in this team, this is the way this team works. You come in and you've seen 100,000 times that having small stories, for example, small work items really helps motivate the team. But you end up having to convince them that, hey, this thing that's making you miserable is making you miserable. Please listen to me. Please give me a chance. And that's kind of the hardest thing, right? Because, we've heard about unlearning and unlearning being harder than just learning something. It can be really tough to break out of these kind of preconceived notions, almost harder than going from zero because you're kind of starting at a negative. So have you guys had any experiences with this? Do you know anything about unlearning? What's your guys' thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of a book that Barry O'Reilly has written called Unlearn, and in that he talks about just that, Eddie, where he talks about relearning is very much harder if you already have experiences and data that might refute what you're going to learn. So you have to kind of throw out your experiences, throw out your data in order to accept new experiences and new data, and then create new patterns about how you're going to behave and change the way that you operate. I think that's particularly important here is because it's like people are so wedded to the way things are, whether that's in a miserable state or whether it's in a happy state, that it becomes very hard for them to experience, it becomes very hard for them to imagine a world that is different. And it becomes very hard for them to accept that a proposal is viable or even beneficial if they're clung to, okay, well, this is the way it always was. So in our real world, that might be a reluctance to try something. It might just be as simple as, but I've worked, it might be me saying, oh, well, I've worked with teams that found this useful, and they're like, it couldn't work for us. This won't work for us, but this is the way we already do it. So I've seen that quite a few times.
What do you guys think are some of the reasons why teams stick to habits that aren't necessarily serving them? Is it just because we're kind of creatures of habit and it's just a natural thing to do? Or are there any specific factors that you guys have noticed that, lead more likely to teams becoming more defensive about the way they're doing things or anything along these lines?
Well, it's the devil, right? So even if something's uncomfortable, you habituate to it. And I sometimes moving out of discomfort is scarier because the movement out of discomfort involves going into the unknown. And that's naturally scary to people. I've often seen folks want to stick with something that's painful or something that isn't working with them because they're aware of what the pitfalls of that are. And they're unsure of what doing something new will mean for them, even if that could mean being out of pain.
If fear of the unknown is, I mean, it's we always fear the unknown. What tips would you give? I'm a Scrum Master. I really want to help this team. I'm going in there. I'm saying, guys, please, I guess trust me, right? But trust me can often not be enough to get past fears, right? Fears are pretty deep rooted sometimes. What advice would you give to me? How can I reach these guys? Do I just change the way they work and say, here's the new system, or do I have to get their buy-in first? And if I need to get their buy-in first, how am I going to even approach trying to get there?
One thing that I've done is offering a change as a proposed experiment. Let's just try it for a sprint and then see what happens. And that to me has worked really well with the teams that I've worked with.
I think like there's this idea of learned helplessness as well. So I used to be capable of something, but someone took it away from me, and now I feel helpless to be able to do it, right? So another role did this, and now you're asking me to do it. I could never do that. And I think as a strategy as a coach might be to say, but you've done something like this in the past, or you would do this in your home life. Why can't you do it in your work life? I think looking at those analogies about how you manage a lot of things yourself in your own life. You don't rely upon another person to do a whole bunch of stuff for you, which is what some people might have found, a position they might have found themselves in the work life. That's another strategy you can use.
In traditional management styles, people often sit around and they're waiting for instructions. They're waiting to be told what to do. So the idea of empowering them is alien. And people have learned not doing something. People often don't get in trouble for not doing something.
And you've got a guy who's on a diving board and he doesn't believe he can do it. He doesn't believe he can jump in and be okay, right? He's going to be fine. Is there a big difference between convincing him he can do it and him taking the dive himself? Or are you kind of pushing him in and then afterwards saying, look, it worked. Now you can do it again?
You got to do that sometimes, right? So there's situations where no amount of cajoling, and you talked about trust. So building trust is key. But I mean, every kid has had that moment where they feel betrayed by their parent because the parent just had to get them to jump. And then, if it was done responsibly, then the child is usually happy that it happened.
Yeah, I think there is a slight difference. I mean, I think, taking someone's choice away from them could put them on the back foot where they're going to just refuse to come to the table again. So regardless of whether you took the choice away from me and your choice was more successful, just means I'm disengaged now. I'm not even going to come to the table. I'm not even going to talk to you. So you could be kind of, not to go full circle here, you could be shooting yourself in the foot by doing that. In other instances, like asking for trust, say, trust me on this. I'm not going to guarantee the outcome, but you can blame the outcome on me, then you're likely to bring people along. So it's not asking them to fully say, yes, Ben, I agree, this is the best thing in the world, but you're saying, just come along for the ride. And it's Alana's thing with an experimentation. Come along for the ride for a little bit, work with me on this. Let's reevaluate in a period of time. You're not then you're not pushing them off the diving board. You're not asking them to jump with both feet without you there. It's almost like a halfway house.
Off the diving board, don't tell them how to do it. Ask them how they would do it. Like dive how you would dive. And it's kind of like analogous with like, what process do they want to create? What bad practice are you trying to replace? What would they do differently? And empowering them by thinking about what they would actually do differently so that they also have ownership and accountability to the new practice that they're adopting.
Getting people in touch with the pain they're experiencing is another big factor in this. People only change when the discomfort they're experiencing becomes greater than the discomfort of the change itself.
Like reminding them that you don't have to fall in love with your captor, and going back to the Stockholm thing, remind them that they are actually captive. They are a captor or been kidnapped, and that they don't have to. They have the key. They can get out of it if you're in the Agile situation. All right. Well, that was awesome. Thank you, Lior, Ben, Eddie. That was awesome. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And please let us know in the comments below. What are your thoughts? Are you stuck at work somewhere? Or do you have any tips for other people who are watching this who might also need some suggestions? So that's all we've got for today. We'll see you next time.